It's a running back world in dynasty drafts. When will it change? We have the answer. Welcome to the Footballguys Dynasty Show. I'm your host, Chad Parsons. And Jordan and I, as discussed last week, are participating in an FFPC Dynasty Startup Draft. So we're going to give you the inside scoop from our startup journey. I assume, since we're only a few days in, we're in round 8 of this draft, that we will be done by next week's show. That's a pretty strong projection there. But man, Jordan, the start of this draft, and we're going to get into when will it change here in a second, but it is all about the running back. And Superflex, you bring in the quarterbacks, 2 tight ends. You're going to see a lot more of them in the top 15 to 20 of your startup. But we saw 8 of the first 9 selections be running backs, where you can say it's flat at the wide receiver position. You can use a storyline for whatever you like to try to support this. But the point is that we have young pedigree running backs that have jobs or projected to have jobs for a sustained amount of time. And the wide receivers, they are aging. All the ones at the top are 26, 27, 28 years old. And a lot of folks are fading those, whether it's viewed as a flat tier in the first 5 to 8 of them. But running backs were the watchword in our startup draft, with 8 of the first 9 and 9 of the first 11, with Clyde Edwards-Helaire being a first-round selection in this higher stakes FFPC startup draft.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to go. 12 out of the first 17 picks in that are running backs. You also have 1 quarterback, 2 tight ends, and 2 wide receivers. When's there been a year where there's been only 2 in recent dynasty memory, only 2 wide receivers going in the top 17 of drafts? I mean, this is, of course, is just a one-off. But I mean, and this is something that you and I have talked about. I think we've talked about in prior shows and off air as well. Just this year, that range of wide receivers outside of Michael Thomas there's a lot of sameness, right? There's different profiles, but there's not a huge, I don't think there's a big tier break there and call it from, wide receiver 2 to 10, right? So that I think is part of it. But I do think the other thing that you said is on the number, which is the pedigree. We're just living in a really good running back time. Where there's a lot of depth, where there's a lot of the high picks have been successful recently. So that's a good thing as well, where that hasn't been true at wide receiver of late. And I think it's impacting strategies. I mean, you and I in this draft did some different things that I think in a normal world we wouldn't do. Including our first 2 picks as running backs. That's something that historically we haven't done. So yeah, I mean, it's a much different world than it was maybe even this time last year or a couple years ago. There's just so much depth at running back that it's really changing how these early drafts are looking, and the drop off is steeper too. Whereas historically the drop off's been steeper from wide receivers, where now I think once you get outside of 10, 11, 12. Right, there's a tier break in there in terms of whether it's some of the rookies, or whether it is also going down some of the guys that maybe aren't in as locked in spots. Whereas you can go and feel really good about wide receiver in 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th round in all of those ranges, where you're getting much less profiles at running back after, say, the top 15 to 20 picks in drafts this year.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to about 10 years ago, where you had, the 2016 class of running backs, where there was D'Angelo Williams and Reggie Bush, et cetera. And especially going through 2007 to 2008 with McFadden and Chris Johnson, Matt Forte, Ray Rice. I mean, Jamal Charles, you had a number of young running backs. And it feels very similar to that, where for a few years, it's the tagline to start the show. It's a running back world. And I think this is just an example of it's dangerous to proclaim something as static, of this is the way I draft. This is the way you should go about a startup draft, because every year is different. You have right now, and the big problem is if you if you function in a world, and I do plenty of studies on age and curves and things like that, to where one of my taglines is prime window of production, and that is not a trademark thing. What it really means is that this is the window where typically the most peak seasons happen for each position. And for running back, you can really project out to about 27, maybe 28 years old. And you have so many running backs right now that are on the first half of that. I mean, that we're picking apart Ezekiel Elliott or Alvin Kamara for being 25 years old, 25.1, 25.2 for this season. And everyone else is pretty much younger than that. And that is really a glorious position to have, where you could have these cornerstone running backs. You're getting most of their prime window of a 3 to 4 year variety. And even folks that look long-term for Dynasty are saying you function in a 2 to 3, maybe 4 year type window of, aligning your production. And with the wide receivers, we talk about insulating yourself, and these wide receivers, and 27, again, you're still in your prime. But the problem with that is the market value perspective, that you sit there and you say, I'm drafting a first round startup pick, and how liquid will it be at 30 years old? And you may say, I'm drafting this player. I'm drafting Michael Thomas or Devontae Adams, and I'm going to hold them forever, quote unquote, forever. That's great. But you probably want a little more market flexibility and liquidity with that asset to be more universal currency. And when a wide receiver gets to 30, maybe even 29 in today's Dynasty League, you're just not going to have that flexibility. Half the league probably in a given year or given moment won't be all that interested even approaching what their utility is to your team. And that's one of the problems, I think, or one of the reasons to not draft a wide receiver in the first round or two, let's say, of that age. One of the arguments would be, versus a 22, 23-year-old running back with a job and a pedigree, is that their windows of production coming up are pretty similar. And yet, let's look at what the market value difference is. Even 24 months after drafting them, it's probably going to side with the running back.
Yeah, and it's interesting too when you're in a startup draft, right? You might, as compared to an existing league, when you're comparing these players, some of these veteran wide receivers that you would have to draft in the top 2 to 3 rounds of your startup draft, this draft that we're in, you can get for a lot less in existing leagues. Julio Jones, for example, is a good example of a player that's going a little bit cheaper than what we're talking about, but that is hitting that age curve where his value is dropping. And all of a sudden you can get him for a late first or a couple of second round rookie picks and have a wide receiver 1 type projection on him in 2020. Right. So I do think, in terms of, it's not that we're necessarily shying away from those profiles. I actually think that there's value there in terms of acquiring players when everyone else is bailing on the value price. It's the question of when to do it. And that is, in a startup draft, you really want to be acquiring a lot, especially early, acquiring a lot of players that you expect to lose value. I think that's a little bit different of a discussion than compared to your existing league. But I mean, let me ask you this in terms of, we haven't talked about this, the Zeke Elliott situation he tested positive for COVID-19. This is something I've been thinking a lot about in terms of how to react to these things. I actually think there's a chance that this makes him more valuable going into the season, as sort of bizarre as that sounds. If he comes through this okay, develops the antibodies, and is okay for training camp, he's probably not going to get it right during the season. So I think that it actually creates an interesting buy window right now if you sort of can tolerate some risk. Again, would I love to have selected him in the top 3 picks of the startup draft and no, with that happening. But I do think in an existing league, it's an interesting value. But I'm sort of curious your thoughts on the Zeke situation.
Yeah, I think, again, having it earlier as opposed to later is a benefit. This is a season that if it goes off, you kind of think it's going to be a week-to-week thing. Depth is going to be super valuable. The waiver wire is going to be more interesting and more of a roller coaster ride, even during the week. It could be even after, there's been talk that there's going to be multiple tests weekly, that, if it's wide open, first come, first serve by Thursday, Friday, Saturday of a week, and most leagues are, or even if there's a second cycle, this could be rolling with, a player's in, a player's out, and all of a sudden the backup's on the waiver wire in more shallow leagues, and who has the backup, and all of a sudden now they're an auto start. Really check your lineups, on Sunday morning. All of these things are going to become a little more focused. And like you mentioned with Ezekiel Elliott, if they've already had it, and there's a much lower probability that they have it in season, that's just going to be a huge benefit in terms of the probabilities of having to navigate something that could be 1 week, could be multiple weeks. You're really kind of holding your breath to get test result information as it's dispersed, as we normally see about practice reports, or now we're talking about a different kind of report that's going to be coming out of each team's facility as we go, and it's the prepared to play check marks that you have to have.
Yeah, totally. So would you think, let's discuss a little bit of the player selection that we did. We drew 101, and we had talked about when we recorded last week, someone made a similar traded Saquon Barkley for basically Michael Thomas in a future first. It was funny. Then we draw 101. We didn't really get much of a opportunity in there we didn't really get a lot of what I would consider serious offers. I mean, we got a couple, but there wasn't really much thought of us moving off of it. And we ended up going Barkley, sort of, it might be a little bit contrarian in terms of the McCaffrey Barkley divide. I think the community might be split on that. But I feel pretty good with Barkley. It's tough to go wrong there, I guess, but I do feel pretty good with Barkley, and it's definitely a 1-2 tier break.
This is Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 8 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. And we really didn't shop it all too much. We also, just to put in another kind of pre-draft conversation we were having, which is we weren't going to be overly aggressive towards, say, trading down with it being more of a shallow roster league. So that is something specific to FFPC that we decided as a team strategy. And with the 2021 class being a little more quarterback centric, maybe a little more tight end centric, not so much running back especially, and wide receiver maybe on par with this year, maybe slightly weaker, somewhere in that vein, that we weren't going to be overly aggressive. Let's go out and try to have 3 or 4 first round picks for next year. Let's do this more of let's build a I don't know if safe's the right word, but let's build a high floor team. Let's be open to trading our own first next year if it provides startup value. And teaser so far, it has not provided that value. But one where we were going to be specific to, this is a strong rookie class. Let's maybe try to get a rookie or two we like in the startup draft instead of trying to get future first round picks in a league where the shallow rosters are going to make it a little more difficult to stash and season as many younger players on our roster. So all of these are very format specific, and it being a 1 quarterback league as opposed to Superflex also dictated part of this of we weren't going to be, moving off of Barkley or McCaffrey at the top of the draft for, moving down, like you mentioned, and getting a future first, something like that wasn't really in the forefront of our thoughts. And one thing that, just kind of tracking, I always look at total team value as we go through the draft. And with my method of calculation and calibration, about 200 is an average team. And boy, you get a McCaffrey or Barkley that's 70, 80, 90 with your top pick, makes it a whole heck of a lot easier, Jordan, to get to 200, 250, 300 just by sticking and picking, making it boring. And I guess the one decision we had was Barkley versus McCaffrey, but it really even wasn't much of a discussion. I think we just passed the text. Yep, Barkley, Barkley. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty straightforward for us, and I think it's something that you've said earlier that in other I think we talked about this last week too, is that Barkley could be coming up on what McCaffrey's done the past couple of years, right? And he's sort of at that stage, basically about a year or so, or year or two behind McCaffrey's arc. So I think it's pretty interesting in terms of if everything could go right. He could be one of those 2 wins over replacement players, the metric we call WARP. That's the type of impact that you can get up there. There's a little bit of risk in the positional aspect of it. Again, wide receivers safer in terms of injury risk than running backs are. But when everyone's going running back in the first round, or 3/4 of the draft there's not really a huge structural disadvantage to do it. It tends to be a little bit more of a luck situation. So I think we're in a good spot coming out of that pick.
Yeah. I'll kind of go past quarterback just because I think both of us are on the same page of saying a quarterback in the first round of a start one feels very that I think it was 2011 ish, which was I think 2010, 11, which was off when there were 2 or 3. I think Breeze had a 5,000 yard season. Stafford did. Aaron Rodgers was in his peak. I mean, and 3 or 4 quarterbacks would go in the first round of a start one dynasty startup draft. But Mahomes going in the first round. The positional value, we've talked about positional drop-offs and, where can you wait? What positions can you wait versus load up in the first 5 to 6 rounds? So Mahomes goes in the first round. Kelsey gets in the back part of the round. Kittle also in the top first round and a half. And it is premium, which is 1.5 PPR, but it still is a start one. So that's a divide I always like to make where I don't move the needle a ton in 1.5 scoring or even 2 PPR. And that is a much bigger premium for scoring. But really the 2 tight end mandatory is when it moves the needle to a great deal. So part of it for us at the 2-3 turn was, we did get a couple quarterbacks going ahead of us. We got a couple tight ends, which we expected. But that aided our options there at the 2-3 turn. Anything in the first, again, until our next selections here, that either stands out to you value-wise or players that you were kind of eyeing yourself?
I thought Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the first round's a little bit. I think that's a little rich. I would have Taylor over him, for example. And I think I would like, maybe a receiver or 2 up there as well.
But the way it was running, though, I mean, running back was just flying off the board. So
right.
If you say stacking them up, and Dalvin Cook was one that we were going to watch because the ADP said, mid first round, and he ended up sliding a decent amount off of the holdout news.
Yeah, he did slide to 203, but I think everyone in the first round except the person at the 1-2 turn, so the person that had 102, took at least one running back in the first 2 rounds. So it'd be interesting to see how that all comes out. In terms of when you look at rosters at the end of it, we are one of the teams that actually went with 2. We thought maybe, hey, listen, Jonathan Taylor, maybe at the end of the second round, is it a situation where we could potentially slide up for 1? And one thing that we did and really spent a lot of time thinking about was looking at different ranges of the draft and picking points and say, hey, what's available here? And I think this has been highly valuable so far, which was what's available and we're going to have turns. So we're going to know within a relatively tight range of players that are going to be available to us. What do we like? What ranges do we like players, and how comfortable are we to move up and down? Which I think has been really, really valuable for us knowing that coming in. For instance, we looked at the 4-5 turn and said, if we can split those picks up and in some way use a pick in that range to move up while sliding as basically a slide down piece where we can move up at a different point in the draft, that makes some sense. And so I do think that was valuable. That 2-3 turn for us, really thinking about the decision you make here. And we thought in pretty bright lights that Mike Evans was going to be in play for us. If we go wide receiver here, there was a good chance, I think, that we could go 2 wide receivers there. There was a chance that we go running back, wide receiver there. I thought there was a lesser of a chance that we go running back. But I thought we were going to come out of that spot with a wide receiver and probably a running back would have been our estimate coming in. And so doing that, we sort of built out a plan, which I think is really important in terms of how you go about answering a lot of these questions. And I think it's helped us so far.
Yeah. And I think one argument that we've used is if you at least get a cornerstone wide receiver. If you want to be flexible, it is a format where there's 2 flexes and you have to start at least 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers. So having an anchor, I know Matt Waldman has mentioned, anchor players or anchor points across the years when I've heard him talking podcasts for now more than a decade, that he talks about, getting that anchor and, getting a Mike Evans or getting one of these top wide receivers that has such a profile of production, even if they are 27 years old at present, it gives you such a point of saying, even if you have to play a committee at wide receiver 2, you still have that wide receiver 1 anchor point for you. Same thing, if you have a Saquon Barkley or someone up there high in the draft where you have supreme confidence in their viability over even the next 2 to 3 seasons. I think that's really valuable, and that's why could the best player available, and we're always going to preach, get those, worry about your lineup a little bit later, but if you are able to get at least in the first 3-4 rounds an anchor player at some of the critical positions, and without super flex, without 2 tight end, the critical positions are running back, wide receiver here, being able to end up, and what I would say is Mike Evans, how much different is the profile from Mike Evans to some of the wide receivers that went mid-second, or even someone like Michael Thomas, where you can say the high end has been better for Michael Thomas, but the longevity and the prove it to me factor is relatively similar, and we get him a round and a half, almost 2 rounds later.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on one of the things we talked about too was the running backs that would fall. I mean, taking Cam Akers at the 2-3 turn, it seemed rich, but until the board started coming off. Right. Is that fair to say?
Right. They always say, like, everyone has a plan going into a fight until you get punched in the mouth. Well, the punch in your mouth, like you said, we had sort of a pipe dream, like, boy, wouldn't it be great if we were able to trade for low cost, like to the mid-second, Jonathan Taylor's slipping a little bit, and we just lock him up too. We get Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, and isn't life grand? Well, he goes early second. Right. Dalvin Cook goes, Derrick Henry, we didn't have a whole lot of interest. J.K. Dobbins goes right before us, but you say, what's left? And yes, we like Leonard Fournette. That could have been someone, but really, you say, what profiles are you looking for? And so Dobbins is gone. It's Akers and Swift. We say to ourselves, they're going to go. If we don't take them here by the mid-third, they're going to be gone. So whatever we think we're going to be trading up from the 4-5 turn, which again, you're always kind of thinking you're so far away, you may trade up. We ended up trading up from the round 4-5 zone, but you say to yourself, running back really is falling off. We have tons of favorites in the mid to late rounds, but you still want some cornerstone young guys to build around. And Cam Akers is absolutely one of our favorites. And you say, well, you get him at, running back 4 off the board of a rookie draft setting. We'll take that. I've taken him at 102, 103 before, so I'll gladly take him at 4. And you just say it's drying up, and wide receiver still has some static tiers going on.
Yeah, 5 rookie running backs in the top 26 picks of this draft. It's just, it's that type of class.
Well, and I talked about it, 2008, 2009, 2010. Yeah. These were the guys that are 21, 22, 23 years old. Back then, I'm sure plenty of titles were being won by teams that had multiple of those players. Now we got Barkley at 23, Akers at 21, in a league where you have to start 2 or more. So again, we'll take that. We've got Evans, and we basically said, running back, we're going to monitor Fournette going into round 3, round 4. Probably not going to be looking tight end soon. Probably not looking quarterback soon. And we say there's a bunch of wide receivers, but we're going to monitor those heavily. And we ultimately traded up a decent amount from the end of round 4 in order to acquire a wide receiver, another cornerstone one, because in the first 3, 4, 5 picks of your draft, Cam Akers you could view as a risk, but you want to play it generally safe with the other picks and say, let's hit some doubles and triples. If we hit a home run, that's great, but let's try to hit doubles and triples, and we're going to be right there in the building blocks of this team.
Yeah, so this is a funny one in terms of how this all went down. We trade up from the 4th round to the end of the 3rd. You had sent me, I don't know how many it was. It seemed like double digits by the time I actually got around to reading them. But I was on my bike, and you were like trying to negotiate a trade up at the time.
I could hear the wind going through your helmet, Jordan, of you going 72 miles an hour down a New York hill.
Yeah, it wasn't that fast, but
we were in the war room. We were in the war room negotiating a trade.
Right, we were in the war room, and I'm getting a call, and I'm huffing away, and I'm half out of breath, but this again, the plan we went in with was, hey, this is going to be a spot we need to monitor in terms of the sphere of wide receivers. So, we thought DJ Moore and Mike Evans and AJ Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, Amari Cooper, Odell Beckham Jr., and Allen Robinson. It's sort of a group in there. Hey, can we sort of pick off two of them? And whether that's one slides into the fourth round, whether we need to move up, how we can sort of massage that happening was really something that we thought a lot about. And again, as we said at the 4-5 turn, we didn't really like the odds of anyone getting there, that of those players getting there. We thought there was a clear tier break. And knowing that and having that plan in place, we said we can move up and tried to move up for a while. We tried to move up a bunch of different ways. Nothing really bit until that point, until I got the call when I was, huffing away up the hill. You say coming down hills, I was definitely going up them very slowly. But yeah, the trade for Robinson basically right at the end of that tier. So we basically maximized the value in terms of what we, waiting all the way there. And honestly, I think really highly of Allen Robinson, and I cover the Bears every week for Football Guys, for the Football Guys recaps, and he's one of my favorite wide receivers in the NFL just because he was so dominant last year, underappreciated. So I really, coming out of this, going Barkley, Akers, Evans, Robinson in the first 36 picks, it's a little atypical for how you and I typically build our teams with a move up in that range. But I think we got right inside the line to where we needed to get to sort of build the core four that we wanted.
Yeah, and I like to say indicators because, again, we were tracking this subset of wide receivers, and it got down to the last guy, and honestly, I think even at 310, 311, we were looking to maybe make a move because you get Juju Smith-Schuster off the board, Amari Cooper, Odell Beckham at 311 was really, I think at 311, trying to make a similar trade to making there. So moving up, and it's about looking at tiers where we move back from 501 to 801 on the back end of that trade. But the way we were looking at it is we were going to maybe be looking to trade back from 501 or one of those picks at the 4-5 turn anyway. So moving back really was not going to be a big deal. And it turning out with who we selected in round 8, which is kind of catching us up to where we are as of the time of this recording, is, again, didn't really end up hurting us at all, yet we get inside of that tier with Allen Robinson. I was tongue-in-cheek thinking about all these lines I was going to say about how he's had great quarterback play for his career. Boy, like, he's so great only because of his situation so far. He's going to be one of those players 5 years from now. We wonder, boy, how good was Allen Robinson if he had been in one of these great situations that some of these other players had, over their peak window. We'll see how this works out with Bears quarterbacks, etc. But do want to mention about the Football Guys daily email update from Joe Bryant. You're going to get all the news mentioned about Ezekiel Elliott with his COVID-19 positive test. And we're going to be seeing a lot of that. You want to get this into your email every single day. Comes out overnight. So first thing when you get up, you're going to get all of the NFL and Dynasty news you need. And do want to point out, you get links to all the new and recent Football Guys articles coming out. I saw a good one from David Dodds over the last 24, 48 hours. It's called Out of the Gate. He actually looks at a really cool way of beyond the typical strength of schedule to assess the early season easier and tougher roads for our fantasy offenses. Andrew Davenport has a great 7-part series on mastering the auction draft. And I have a 4-part series about the role index, really cool charts and matrices there. And you have one on deep roster strategy guide, which is the opposite of this FFPC draft in which we're taking part of. I mean, you're looking at 30 plus roster spots and how that differs from your typical 2025. Some people even play in dynasty leagues or keeper leagues that are sub 20-man rosters. So you really have to adapt to your format, know your league, as the common phrase goes. But again, all of that content you're going to get right to your inbox where you can see what Football Guys is offering. And it really is. I think the phrase people use is it's a water hose. You just open it up and it flows. All the fantasy content you need, all the data you need, it just flows this time of year. And it's going to heat up. July, August are huge months to get ready for all of your drafts, dynasty, redraft, and otherwise, to be ready to dominate the upcoming season.
Yeah, and we're also doing the undervalued, overvalued sleeper on each position, which I think you've been in on all of those in terms of contributing. I know I have been, but they're a lot of fun. You get a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different eyes looking at things. It's a great way to sort of get ideas about players and formulate a strategy going into draft season.
Yep, you get sometimes 8 to 10 write-ups on one player on why they are in or out, of thinking that they're undervalued or overvalued. So yeah, one of the favorite things for me personally to read that Footballguys puts out, and we're both able to be a part of that. So we traded up, which means we traded out of that 4-5 zone, and then we were going to wait. We waited about 3 total rounds. We had we have 3 more picks to discuss that we have made so far recording this show. And we were still going to wait it. We actually almost got sucked in, Jordan, to a quarterback-like situation here in the first 8 rounds or so, and that was Russell Wilson. He was falling. We ended up passing, I will say. We did make a marginal trade up where the best player available was Jalen Reagor, actually at the 110 value range if you're stacking up rookies in a start one variety format here. So getting him at 110, Keyshawn Vaughn goes ahead of him. And again, a point where we get 2 solid Mike Evans, Allen Robinson wide receivers. Let's take a shot on Jalen Reagor, a player we both love the profile, love the early situation there with the Eagles. And there's talk that he's going to be working in the X position. That's also recent news that's come out. Learning from Deshaun Jackson, not a bad situation there. And we know Deshaun Jackson has a little propensity for missing some games. So this thing could turn straight toward Jalen Reagor with some bright lights earlier rather than later. But we trade up for them. We trade up for him as our wide receiver 3. And then it was going to be back to outside of a discussion about Russell Wilson, about pounding the upside and high leverage running backs of our choice.
Yeah, I think Reagor is wide receiver. He's wide receiver 1 for me in this rookie class. So to get him at 110, that's nice. And when you're stacking up rookies, I believe he's your wide receiver 1 as well, if memory serves, right, Chad?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, we basically get. If you just think about this in a rookie draft sense, how often do you get Reagor at 110? Virtually never in a start one. You get Keyshawn Vaughn going up ahead of both Justin Jefferson and Reagor. So that's pretty nice in terms of creating some additional value there. I think the Keyshawn Vaughn pick is pretty interesting when you look at he goes ahead of James Conner and David Johnson. If you want to project out an immediate situation, which I think is what people are doing with Keyshawn Vaughn, having him ahead of James Conner and David Johnson isn't the way to go about it, right? That's not those guys. I think have better opportunities this year, at least in my opinion. But I'm lower on Keyshawn Vaughn, I would admit, than the market. But yeah, so that gives us the opportunity to lock in Reagor, and I think at this point we talked about what our positional benchmark wanted to be in the first 10 rounds. I think you and I were comfortable with some combination of either 6 running backs to 4 wide receivers or 7 running backs to 3 wide receivers, depending on the combination of the receivers, right? So if we had more stability at the wide receiver spot, we would be okay doing only 3, and that was assuming no quarterback or tight end, which was part of what our game plan assumed. And then if we went with a little bit more risk at wide receiver, we might take a 4th, and so do a 6-4 split at 6 running backs to 4 wide receivers. I think we're on the fence with that in terms of maybe going into round 8 or 9, seeing what's there at wide receiver, the 10th round, seeing what's there at wide receiver. But I think we're in plenty of position now to basically take whatever comes to us. And so we get Reagor under our belt, got to wait a full round, and then take a player that we've talked about, Alexander Mattison, my most highly owned player across all of Dynasty. Love the potential upside that he has, again, with the Dalvin Cook the Dalvin Cook holdout situation. There's 1.5, 2 warp potential in the 7th round, 2 wins over replacement. That's a huge difference. And even if Dalvin Cook doesn't hold out, any game that he misses, Madison's probably a locked-in starter, assuming that he's healthy, which wasn't actually the case last year when Cook missed a game. So, I like that. And then we sort of back it up with our other guy, A.J. Dillon, and it's really a who's who of our favorite players at this point through the eighth round.
Yeah, the one interesting thing, I actually was a little surprised Madison made it that far. I mean, maybe I'm kind of projecting my thoughts to the market or to the general consensus out there, and obviously we're dealing with just 11 specific owners in this draft. But I would think if Dalvin Cook falls from the mid first to 203 off of, and I would guess it's all based on that news, right? That Alexander Madison. Now, he's up. I mean, we did some FFPC ADP, and so this is a little on the early side of that, but perfectly within the scope of outcome and reason. And that's before that news. That's not really encompassing enough data points, pre holdout. So post holdout. So I was a little surprised at that. So Madison felt like the guy we had to take. And I will say, wide receiver kind of went sideways on us because I know we had discussed Tyler Lockett in this range, Jarvis Landry especially, and Jarvis Landry was one. If memory serves, we talked about maybe if we couldn't trade back at the 4-5 zone, taking Jarvis Landry right there, right? I mean, he was one that we said, him or Thielen, Robert Woods, Keenan Allen, we were kind of open to one of those veteran wide receivers at that spot as our wide receiver 2, 3 in our pre-draft planning. But all of them go in round 7. And so with the wide receiver position doing that, it felt like a running back or Russell Wilson spot. Now we ultimately took A.J. Dillon, which I still go back and forth. We're the mid 8th round right now, and catching us up to present time that A.J. Dillon was one that I think if we let him go, he probably more than half the time makes it back to us at the 8-9 turn, but there's no way to know that. And he is definitely one of our guys to say, let's not mess around here. Let's not really try to push probabilities and just take the guy that we really like.
Yeah, getting too cute at times can just jump up and get you. I do think knowing it, as I'm looking at this board, there's so much yellow on it, and yellow is wide receivers. Basically, since round 3, so round 3 through round 7, there's been either 6 or 7 wide receivers drafted each round. Right, so you're looking at about half the board since the second round has been wide receivers, a little bit more than that. So in hindsight, is that a thing where we could have said, hey, maybe Dillon slides, maybe, but on the flip side of that, we like Russell Wilson. But as we look at this board, and one of the things that we really looked at coming into this draft was, I mean, how late can we go at quarterback? And it's still plenty of options there later on. And so that's really one of the things that, there are he's quarterback 7. So, I mean, we can wait
even if the other 4 teams take whatever quarterback they want as their QB1, then it becomes a matter of every quarterback that gets drafted as a team's backup by that point it hurts their team more than it hurts ours, right, is what I would say. So it's a game of chicken where, and Russell Wilson was easily the best quarterback on my board and, arguably the best player on the board. But when you start talking about drop-offs at positions and just saying, if we wait 10 more rounds and draft each of these positions, the opportunity cost, quarterback is easily the best. So you can say Russell Wilson's going to score the best or project the best of the position, but also say, how big is the gap from 3, 4, 5 other guys on the board, if not 5 to 8?
Yeah. And to take the other side of it too, is of the guys that we took there. So if you put Alexander Madison, A.J. Dillon, and Russell Wilson in sort of the decision process, which one of those 3 guys has the opportunity to go in the top 30 next year? And that's not even like that might seem bullish. I mean, that's getting into the later teens in terms of the position with how fast the running backs came off. I mean, you could argue that they could be up in the top 20 in terms of what this board looks like at some point next year. That's how running back aggressive this league has been. So getting in on them now with that upside, Is there more risk? Yes, but I do think there's a lot more upside there. And is Wilson ever going to do that? I mean, you and I like Russell Wilson plenty, but there's probably not a situation where he's going to see a significant upgrade in terms of valuation over the next any point in his career. I would doubt that he's going to go up a couple more rounds than where he's at right now.
He's a really solid floor play.
Yes,
really solid, hyper strong floor play.
Absolutely. So I think those things, thinking about those things and through that decision-making process and sort of putting that out loud, I think that's an important thing to consider when you're making your picks.
Absolutely. And I would say, looking ahead, and again, we don't want to tip our picks. There very may well be 2 or 3 people listening that are in our draft. So this is just a again, public record, and not tipping your pitches, so to speak. We're not banging trash cans in the hallway here of all the players we're targeting. But again, we're through. We now have seven players on our board, and we are at 4-3, right, Jordan? Doing the tally. So we're at 4-3. We talked about, potentially through the first 10 picks being 6-4 or 7-3. So we're on pace to still be in that zone. We are looking at, I would say a quarterback in the next couple rounds is unlikely with Russell Wilson going off the board. You're probably looking at Joe Burrow or Carson Wentz or Tua, Matt Ryan as some of the next ones in terms of ADP. So there's a pretty decent drop. So I would be surprised if maybe no one takes a quarterback for the next 2 rounds or so. Is within the scope of outcomes. So it's really a waiting world. I mean, someone that takes Lamar Jackson, I mean, why would you take your QB2 in round 11? Like, that sort of de-optimizes taking Lamar Jackson in the second round because you're taking up another meaningful roster spot. And tight end has been slow off the board. It's starting to come off the board in round 7 and 8 a little more, but there was really a backlog, and there still is, with guys like Noah Fant, Hayden Hurst, Austin Hooper, Dallas Goedert, that are all top 100 ADP and sitting around, so there's going to be some out there into round 9 and maybe even round 10, because that's another deep position that you just, without start 2, it generally trickles off the board more than flows regularly. And that's another observation. Any other kind of summaries through the first 7-8 rounds of this draft for you?
No, I think it's set up pretty well for us. It's a little atypical about how we go about it, but I think understanding the board and something you said early on is really important. Having a general philosophy, but knowing that each year is a little bit different and how to maximize your strategy, I think that's really done us a lot of value so far.
Yeah. And one thing we've talked about is, the wide receiver, there's better options later in the draft for core type guys. Allen Robinson is a critical part. You've mentioned Julio Jones in a 2-3 year window where you look at his contract. I mean, he's going to be there unless he opts out and doesn't want to take $20 million and he wants to, go Calvin Johnson and say, I'd rather go do something else in my 30-ish, 30 to 33 kind of zone of age. And doing something else. But, we don't really have signs of that. So he's another one in that zone. And there's even ones later on. We talked about Jarvis Landry and a few others that we feel comfortable with in the mid rounds where you may not have that floor, ceiling, outcome, pedigree, profile type feeling every single year about specific wide receivers. And this year is one of those cases. So it kind of depends on the year and how comfortable you are waiting at each position. And obviously we've said we're okay waiting at quarterback and tight end, specifically in this start 1 format. Let's talk some dynasty trades. So outside of the FFPC marketplace here, we'll mix in 2 or 3 here to close the show. We actually have an Alexander Mattison one, so we might as well weigh in on where we stand because he's going to be a player with Dalvin Cook's holdout that's only going to be fueled in the fire. The longer this goes, the closer Le'Veon Bell and James Conner this goes to getting to week 1, or even Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler. Eckler was a little more of a projection just because he was a subsized ancillary player and not maybe considered a true handcuff in terms of how he would be utilized last year. But again, as you get close to week 1, all of a sudden it becomes a auto starter versus trading them for X scenario. And Alexander Mattison in a 14-team league was traded for Hayden Hurst. So you do get a little more premium on tight end, but 14 team stretches every position with additional starters. What are your thoughts on that, Jordan?
I like Hayden Hurst in terms of the situation at Atlanta, but I haven't seen a trade recently where I wouldn't have taken the value on Alexander Mattison. So I'll take Alexander Mattison pretty clearly here.
Yeah, pretty easy. And again, I think it's easy to get sucked into saying, well, I paid X for Madison and now I can get X plus 20% or X plus 30%. I mean, we've kind of made our pitches, and the closer this gets, and if Madison starts starting games to begin the year for the Vikings, it'll only be more. But just talking about the impact he offers from a floor ceiling projection, I mean, again, he could be someone that is a top 5 to 8 weekly projection on Football Guys with Dalvin Cook out of the lineup. And it doesn't take the holdout going all the way through 10 plus games of the season for Madison to return high level impact and value this season. There's a lot of different avenues for him to be the starter sooner rather than later. Here's another one in a 2-quarterback league and 0.25 point per carry. So you want to talk about running backs being heavily valued, but also quarterbacks. You have Phillip Rivers and Jarvis Landry for Chris Carson. So Chris Carson coming back from injury, Jarvis Landry coming back from injury, Phillip Rivers in a new situation. So a lot of uncertainty if you're looking from what happened to what will happen this season. But Rivers in a 2-quarterback league and Landry for Chris Carson with the point per carry.
Yeah, I'll take the Rivers Landry side of this one. I think there's a lot of uncertainty with Carson. Contract, hip, right? This isn't a clean injury, if you will. This isn't, there's some uncertainty about it. And there hasn't been a ton of news about it. I actually put him in the overvalued category in the running back article that we were talking about earlier. And for me, if I were to do I think Phillip Rivers was a sleeper, and Jarvis Landry's, I think, pretty chronically undervalued. So I would take that side pretty aggressively. I think Rivers has sneaky top 12 upside this season.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that. I think a lot of people are sleeping on Rivers for what he can do. He's got a great profile long term. He's one that optimizes running backs and as well as tight ends. You know, I just think he's set up where maybe the weapons don't look gaudy. Certainly not like the Chargers on paper. But I think he's one that, especially with, you know, Jonathan Taylor, if he starts showing signs, they have a much better offensive line, which is going to help Rivers. And again, Jarvis Landry is pretty sneaky. I'm going to say Chris Carson is one that Carlos Hyde is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they took a guy that has a profile, kind of a late bloomer in staying healthy, being more of a 1A feature option in the NFL. But, you know, you don't sign, you know, listen to what NFL teams are telling us. They got Rashad Penny coming back from a major injury. Chris Carson, this is not a minor injury, and a lot of uncertainty on the depth chart outside of that. And to say, well, we got Carlos Hyde sitting right here. If we need him, 20 plus touches week 1. I mean, this could be an early season, shallow league. People aren't drafting Carlos Hyde, and he's an auto pickup, high waiver claim option right away. You know, if things are pointing, even in the preseason, if things are pointing in the right direction. So Carlos Hyde is a really interesting player, just not involved in this trade, but someone worth mentioning. Here's another interesting one, 12-team PPR, Marquise Brown and a 4th next year, pretty insignificant piece, but Marquise Brown for Tyler Boyd, essentially, Jordan. So we're talking about Tyler Boyd with a profile, Marquise Brown with the pedigree. But again, coming out of the gates last year, I think he was wide receiver 50-ish, and that was despite Lamar Jackson with his high efficiency and regression-worthy year.
Yeah, this is 2 players I don't typically traffic in. So it's an interesting, when I saw this one, I was wondering what the rationale was for it, honestly, in terms of what brings you to do this deal. I'll probably go with Marquise Brown in this situation, just because I think that I like some of the longevity a little bit better in terms of the higher pedigree. I think the situation in Cincinnati is a little bit cloudier, whereas I think Marquise Brown's profile is pretty. I think his involvement can only grow, where I'm not certain of that with Tyler Boyd. So I would go with that, basically a pedigree installation bet with Marquise Brown. But if I was going to trade either one of them, I wouldn't try and do this type of trade.
Yeah, I'm surprised that very rarely do I look at a deal. I'm like, wow, that's very fair. You know, I can see both sides. I know the market is more on Tyler Boyd than Marquise Brown at present. but it's pretty fair across the board in terms of my valuation system. And I'm anti Marquise Brown just from the sake of he's such a rare sized player at 160 something pounds. He's in an offense where I don't really trust the passing prowess of the quarterback at the helm in the point guard situation. And I like Devin Duvernay that they brought in. I think Mark Andrews is the actual wide receiver one of that offense, kind of like George Kittle and some other tight ends around the NFL at various points in time that I just don't have a lot of faith in the upside of Marquise Brown. Tyler Boyd, I've never been a big fan, but he actually has a season of note under his record. I think he's sort of a poor man's, in a way of like not a huge measured athlete guy, but very toolsy. You know, he had a good production score coming out of college. So a little Keenan Allen to his game. So I don't know where that ends up. Does he ever be a true number one for a team? I do know that over the next 12 months, there's some ambiguity and uncertainty with the Bengals in terms of quarterback and who's going to be back in 2021. But again, I think there's a little more stability with Tyler Boyd. And I don't think there's enough upside with Marquise Brown. So I guess I would lean Tyler Boyd just a little bit in a trade where I think it's pretty fair, but you got to pick a side because here we are at the judgment table, Jordan. All right, last one. And this is going to be Mike Williams. So this is basically, are you in or are you bailing on Mike Williams? Changing quarterback situation. Keenan Allen there for now in the number one spot. Hunter Henry coming back from injury. So a lot of competition for targets. And this is a 2021 second for Mike Williams, who I believe, I don't have it on hand, but I believe he's had a couple of wide receiver 45, 50 type seasons under his belt. And that is his peak so far, which is pretty underwhelming for a prototypically sized top 10 NFL draft pick.
Yeah, this is a classic. Do you want to bail or not? You're taking a loss on Mike Williams from where you pay what you paid for him perspective, but do you want to insulate? I think that's really what the decision-making process is. My inclination would be to keep Mike Williams. I recognize the fact that the hit rate for once you get outside of entering year 4 with a guy who hasn't done it yet, it's pretty low. You're looking at historically Peter Warrick, Michael Crabtree, and Devontae Parker, right? That's the list of players that have done it from the first round. So in second round, third rounds, you'll get later hits, but in the first round, right, guys either do it early or they don't do it. So that's, I think I'm a little skeptical in terms of the super high upside, but I do think with his pedigree, I think if at worst he settles into a wide receiver somewhere in the 25 to 40 range, I think that there's some value in that because I don't think his job's going anywhere. From a team building perspective, I think that's maybe not necessarily high upside, but I do think there's value in that. I'll take him over the pick at this point because I do think he could be on that track with the slow start a little bit with injury, and he's shown enough. I think there's some touchdown regression, those sorts of things. I'll go with Williams in this case.
Yeah. The one saving grace of the pick is that it is super flex. That you are going to get a little bit of extra boost there, especially in the second round. Maybe this is early or mid in the round. If it ends up being late in the round, I think it's a pretty big bath you're taking in terms of just the pedigree and, like you said, of getting something more than you've had so far with Mike Williams. Like that's one of the big bets you're making here is that you're saying he's going to be a bust. He's not going to turn to, say, Devontae Parker, where at this point in his career he turns it on and you get a rising. Now I think the path to be the wide receiver one for his team is a lot more murky than Devontae Adams. The quarterback is murky. So we'll see how things change, though. I mean, again, contracts can move things swiftly on depth charts. But for Mike Williams, I don't have a lot of faith. I did have 1 or 2 shares, and what I will say is this: he's hard to move. You would think moving him for a random first, and I was doing this starting last year, that would be pretty easy for a guy that was maybe a mid-first initial selection for you. But, you know, if you see a little bit, you still have a chance to exit. I do think that is something to explore. But even going second to first this past year, I was not able to do so. I can't remember the exact package of exit, but he has been a hard one to move. So he's almost been better to hold. Yet in a league that's not best ball, you kind of say, when am I starting this guy? So it's a lot more ambiguous for the utility you're going to have the mechanics in season, of when will I actually be plugging and playing him as my wide receiver 3 or 4. He just kind of blends into these guys that, they could have 2 or 3 downfield play. He's a 50-50 ball maven, jump ball guy that I don't think we're going to see him progress into being one of those 5-tool players, to have a baseball reference, of a do-it-all wide receiver. That's not really his profile. And so I have some concerns about what the overall upside is. But like you said, if you can post a top 20, 25, even 30 season progression from what we've seen through 2 years, then you've got a chance. You've got a chance to get a decent amount more than this. Now, again, clear in the spot, it is super flex, but trying to get that second to a first, I think, is really the line where you need to kind of halt things or use him as a package up piece from Mike Williams to something you like better, as opposed to just dealing for a lower pick than maybe you've tried otherwise.
Yeah, I'm with you on all that. And I do think that we can talk about this class more and more going forward next year. But when a class, the more I'm playing Dynasty, the more I'm studying Dynasty, if a class is not a good running back class, I don't think it's all that valuable in terms of Dynasty. So especially as you get deeper in. So I have a hard time classifying a class that's not great at running back as a great class.
Because so Jordan's going to sit there at 305 and go, do I really want to take a wide receiver? Non-optimal. This is making all the hairs on my neck stand up.
It's going to be my 5th wide receiver in the start 3. It's going a little too deep.
My 5th, not in the rookie class, just overall.
Overall.
A little too much.
Yeah.
Jordan and Chad in 2021 going to be talking about our FFPC team, where we're like, do we want to keep 3 wide receivers or 4? Other teams have like 7 of their 14 positionals. All right. So in this episode, you've heard us discuss Mike Williams a good amount, the Seattle backfield, but especially the FFPC format and the twists and turns, the running back landscape here in the first top 100 almost here, finishing out about 8 rounds or so. We've talked about the future content coming out at footballguys.com, and you need to get out there. And if you're not on the daily email update, that's at footballguys.com/free. All the articles and news you need, including stuff from Jordan, myself, Andrew Davenport with auction draft, mentioned David Dodds out of the gate, tons of new content with the value, overvalued, the value plays and the sleepers at all the skill positions. You're going to be seeing those throughout the past, I think, couple weeks, as well as the next couple weeks coming out. And we're always talking about dynasty trading. So I'm Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty leagues.